page 205, chapter 18, The Nuclear Lie. 8 weeks before trial, Linda, Frank, and I were reviewing every defense action that Jose and his dream team might come up with. We had long expected what Linda would call the nuclear lie, the big one. Our job was figuring out what that might be. With Kaylee's remains found and the crime scene tied to the Anthony home through the duct tape, the argument of abduction by a stranger had become hard to maintain. As late as the late winter of 2011, the defense was still trying to support the theory that Kaylee had been alive, abducted by persons unknown, when Casey went to jail. That theory held that Kaylee had been killed during Casey's incarceration and her body deposited in the Suburban Drive swamp. In this scenario, Casey's alibi was irrefutable. She was in jail, so she couldn't have murdered her daughter, and the poor child's killers were still at large. As their Texas EquiSearch witnesses fell apart one by one, the three of us on the prosecution knew that this version of Casey's lie was dying its inevitable death. In the 2.5 years we'd been on this case, we'd seen this all before, whether it was during the role play with Lee when Casey had first developed the kidnapping story and Casey 2.0 was born, or at Universal Studios when she had reached the end of the hall, or when she had created the Blanchard Park variation of the kidnapping story, Casey 3.0 for Lee. She had nowhere else to go with the mysterious abductor story, so she needed a new narrative. We'd seen it before so many times we could almost smell it. All the telltale signs were there that Casey's story was about to change. It had to. But the nuclear lie that was about to be dropped was beyond even our wildest imaginations. With the Fry hearing finally over, Linda, Frank, and I had submitted the state's list of witnesses, and the defense had submitted theirs. All motions about discovery had been resolved. There was nothing left for either side to do but plan for the logistics of the trial itself. Yet one complication remained. During the Fry hearing, we had received a new witness list from the defense with 2 new names: Dr. Jeffrey Danziger, a psychiatrist from Orlando, and Dr. William Weitz, a psychologist from the Fort Lauderdale area. I had known Dr. Danziger for many years. He was a forensic psychiatrist, and part of his practice was forensic evaluations. He was one of the 2 doctors who had originally examined Casey in July 2008 by order of Judge Strickland, who had asked both doctors to do a basic competency evaluation. At that time, the only significant finding had been that she was unusually happy for somebody in her circumstances. Baez had not filed anything about the content of what these 2 mental health experts were going to testify to, so all signs pointed to another Baez ambush. At the end of the Fry hearing, we raised the issue with Judge Perry. The court had previously ordered that all experts had to provide reports, so we were expecting reports from Danziger and Weitz. For the defense, Anne Fennell said she was going to contact these doctors and have them submit reports by that Friday, April 8th. We had only 4 weeks till trial, so even Friday was pushing it. We needed to decide if we were going to depose them, but we didn't know what they were going to say. That afternoon, I was running out of the courtroom to pick up my children from daycare. Linda and Frank had already gone home. When I got outside the courthouse, I remembered that my wife was on pickup duty, so I slowed my pace. My cell phone rang just as I reached the parking garage. Anne Fennell was asking me to come back upstairs to the courtroom. I walked in to find Fennell, Mason, and Baez standing in the courtroom. Anne told me she had contacted the 2 doctors and there was no way they could get their reports to her by Friday. She wanted to go before Judge Perry to explain the delay, and she needed a member of the prosecution team in court. We called the judge, and he re-entered the now empty courtroom without a court reporter to see what was up. We all stood in the courtroom near the jury box as Anne explained the issue with the report. I didn't have a problem with a slight delay, but time was of the essence. "What is this about?" Judge Perry demanded. "Why don't you just tell? Why do we have all this mystery?" All of us, including Judge Perry, went together into the back jury room. We took seats around a small table. Fennell started by saying that the doctors were important to explaining Casey's failure to report Kaylee's disappearance for the 31 days. I looked at him in disbelief and said, "Why don't you quit playing around and tell us what the story is?" Jose smirked and said the story was going to be that Kaylee drowned by accident and Casey trusted someone she shouldn't have to take care of it. I was dumbfounded by both parts of the premise. They were going to concede that Casey knew Kaylee had died from the beginning, and they were going to implicate someone else in the cover-up. Who would that be? I asked. George, he replied matter-of-factly, as if this was some obvious answer. I looked at him and broke out in laughter. Just bring it on, I said. I can't wait to cross-examine Casey. It was not my proudest moment, but it had been an exceedingly long day, and my feistiness was showing. I thought it was a complete crock of crap. For ages, I had assumed Casey was going to implicate someone beyond herself as a way to deflect blame. Linda, Frank, and I had been debating for years what her next story was going to be. What was shocking was not that she had a new lie, but that this lie contained the combination of Kaylee drowning and Casey blaming George. We had considered both separately, but we had never thought she'd put them both together in the same story. I left the conversation, went downstairs, and called Linda. I got her answering machine and left a cryptic voice message. I know what her story is, I said. Linda called me back right away. You've got to be kidding, she exclaimed when I told her. Frank didn't get back to me until the next day, and he had the same response. Sometime over the next day or two, Linda spoke to Jose and got a little more detail. The story was going to be that Casey had been awakened on the morning of June 16th by her father, saying that Kaylee had drowned in the pool. Everything was on George. Casey took no responsibility whatsoever. That was always her position. The following week, late as usual, we got the reports from the therapists. Dr. Danziger's report had a psychological evaluation of Casey and generalizations about maternal filicide. Dr. Weitz's report, also in very general terms, talked about the ideas of molestation, trauma, and denial. All of these allegations were not unusual to justify a crime. It seemed that Casey saw, as we did, that her prior lies were not going to work, so it was time to come up with another one. Although we will never know the genesis of Casey 4.0, since conversations between Casey and her lawyer are privileged, Linda had a theory. During a deposition of our medical examiner, Dr. G, back in September of 2010, Cheney had probed her about the possibility of drowning. Linda's theory was that he was exploring a potential defense in the case. Of course, at that point, Cheney had still been pushing the stranger abduction story. So, at the time, it appeared to us that Casey 4.0 hadn't been born. Yet.